welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build great tech. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Tim Turner. He is the, I'd say, co-founder of Affinda, along with his brother, which is something that people tell us not to do, is to go and visit with our family. But his experience has been one that we'll share a story today and just talk about a bit of background about who they are, where they started, and to where they are today. So Affinda is what would you call an AI document processing and workflow automation tool, working in a number of industries from legal. I think you started out in recruiting from what I read, and built that over the past 12 years. And recently done a reasonable cap raise in terms of, I think it was 10 plus million to expand out the product globally, over 1,500 clients, 75 countries, and an overnight success, as some might say. So thanks for joining us, Tim.
Yeah, pleasure. Good to be here, Andrew.
Yeah, one thing I read from you, and I'll dig straight into that, is it all began 12 years ago in Ben's apartment next to the university in Melbourne.
Yeah.
I'd been working around the clock at Macquarie and Lazard, while Ben was immersed in the world of quantum physics, having recently completed his PhD at Caltech. With high hopes, big dreams, some poker winnings from the Crown Casino, we've all done that a little bit, we set out to build the best tech company we could. Take me back there, because that's a great place to begin the conversation. We've all, and people listening to this podcast, all start with a vision and an idea and a dream. And one day, 12 years' time, maybe you'll be in a place where you guys are today. But we have to begin. What was that first step like, and how did it all come about?
Yeah, so I've got my brother Ben to thank for the original inspiration. So he's 2 years older. He's the brains behind a lot of what we're doing with his physics background. And I was working very long hours in the investment banking world with no control whatsoever over my time. So on Friday afternoons, we'd talk about the weekend work plan. On Sunday mornings, I'd get calls to go into the office and I'd be there till late on Sunday night. It was a pretty rough existence. And with a girlfriend at the time, thinking about things getting more serious, working 7 days a week wasn't
Not a joyful existence, is it? No.
No, exactly,
No.
exactly. So at the time, Ben was living right near Melbourne University by design in a two-bed apartment, and so he encouraged me to come and work with him, and he was very excited about building a business that was focused around documents and information trapped in documents, and he'd been writing academic papers with academics all over the world, dealing with multiple versions of different documents, edits to documents, like before the technology was good that allowed people to work in the same
12 years ago. Yeah,
it
raw
was
technology.
it was pretty challenging just knowing what all your co-authors were doing. And I'd seen the M&A world with transaction documents flying around 24/7, versions of prospectuses where you get up to version 264, and it's very hard to track, what were the differences between that version and the previous version that you saw, which might have been 20 versions ago. So we both had experienced frustrations dealing with large documents and complex documents, and that was the original inspiration.
How did it all begin? So from the first point of, all right, we're going to start a company, where did it all start? At what point did you had that conversation that weekend, had a bit of the idea formed?
Yeah.
When did the company begin, and when did you leave your job? Because that's always an interesting point for people to think about.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we thought about how do you de-risk it as much as possible. And so I took a leave of absence from Lazard, which is where I was working at the time, for 12 months, not exactly knowing if what the future held. But we thought if we focus on something and we pour our life savings into it, fingers crossed we never need to work for other people again. That was 12 years ago. So touch wood, things have been going well since. But the strategy, not knowing what we were doing back then, and probably to a large extent still not knowing.
Do you ever know? We're always right at the point of our edge, and we just always learning, right? We never really have all the answers, do we?
I think the shortcut is hiring people who've done it before, who can help guide you on the journey. But we thought, well, if we're going to start a company, we need a team, and so we better start hiring people. And so within about 6 months, we probably had 8 to 12 students from Melbourne University all working with us, building proprietary databases and helping build some of the early technology and so forth. So yeah, it went from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. And that was, I guess, the genesis. So we're in the 2-bed apartment, and Ben's neighbours started, wondering what was going on with people turning up
Bit
day
loud
and
in
night.
there.
There's a
Yeah,
lot of
correct.
people coming through the front door and leaving at strange hours in the day and night. And then eventually we moved to a townhouse on Elgin Street in Carlton, so basically the other side of the university. And then the one townhouse, it was a 5-bedroom townhouse, so we had people in each of the bedrooms, which is a little unconventional. And then the house next door came up for lease, and so we leased that one as well. So we had it's like 8 to 10 bedrooms that the team were working
Full of
from.
people, a few.
Yeah, for the first 5 years, and one of those offices had terrible security, so we got broken into. I think it was the third time we got broken into. We gave up on replacing the glass, and we put an old desk basically in front of the door, so that even without the glass, nobody could get through the door. And we'd forgotten all about it. And a few months later, we had a customer who wanted to come and visit the office. And up until then, we'd been going into the city to meet people in nice hotel foyers and so forth. And so temporarily we let our guard down and they came to visit. And we had a boardroom at the front in one of the front bedrooms that was a second-hand French dining table that was not fit for purpose for a boardroom. And they asked to go to the toilet middle of the meeting. And we said, oh yeah, sure, the toilet's at the back of the building. Forgetting that they couldn't actually get to the toilet without climbing over the desk in the hallway. So they politely declined and said that they'd wait until they got back to the city, which ended up becoming a customer, so it didn't get in the way.
Didn't impact. That's okay. Did you move to the city after that? Did you?
Yeah, so we
Time
were
to
there
move
for 5 years, I think, thereabouts, and then we moved into an office in the city. And ran out of space there. It was about 260 square metres at 41 Exhibition Street. And then somewhere in COVID, we got a great deal on our current location at 180 Flinders Street. So close to 900 square metres. So a bit of an increase in space and a nice office for the team, particularly the ones that travel from overseas.
Back to the first customer. It's always a sticky point, and people figure out how do you commercialise product, but.
Yeah.
Where did it all stem from? How did first customer come about? What was the journey there? I know it was recruitment was really the angle that you started in, and more resume sort of components. Seek was one of your customers, for example. Yeah. But take us back to what first customer meant to look like, and how did you approach that first conversation with initial customers?
Yeah, so I sort of took it for granted at the time, but Ben was very keen for us to be global from day one. And so his view was similar to the Atlassian playbook. If you build great products and focus on product-led growth and you remove the sales friction, like make it easy for customers to find you and find the products, make it easy for them to trial and demo them online, provide great documentation that gives them confidence around how to use the product, and then, there's no reason they can't buy the products online without necessarily talking to anyone. And if you've got great support
perfect
around
world for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, your customer base should reflect the global demand for that type of product. And so, we started adding customers in different countries around the world, many of whom we'd never heard of. But they over time they got bigger and we got more well known, and eventually Seek and some of the other big jobs boards came on board for that specific resume parsing product. And all of a sudden, I think it was customers in 40 countries or something, just a function of how we were selling without any salespeople.
Talk a bit about that. How you were selling without any salespeople. Was it mostly online conversion? What did it look like? Was it advertising? How did it all stem together at the beginning?
Yeah, so it was a lot of just sort of the simple Google sort of search, and people searching for the sorts of solutions we were providing. And, we focused a lot on Google PageRank and just some of the really simple foundations. And then, when they land on the website, make it easy for them. help them understand the company and why we're based in Melbourne and the fact that we're not going bankrupt and all the things that often get in the way of the purchasing decision. Nothing particularly sophisticated, but just trying to remove the friction. And as a result, we didn't hire our first salesperson until it was probably 2019, so 7 years into the journey.
It's a fair way in, isn't it? So
Yeah,
mostly handled by yourself, key people in the business that were driving. It was mostly engineers in the business. Is that how it stemmed? It's pretty
yeah,
much just developers, engineers.
mainly the engineers
Yeah.
who were sort of happy doing that. So again, it's not necessarily the right model for everyone, but certainly that model worked really well for us.
Now you mentioned a little bit about product led. What does that mean in your context? Is it how do you put the product front and center? How do you drive that? I talk from a perspective of with a lot of people product in terms of strategy. Product's not the strategy of a business. There's a lot more to it. It can't just be product, but we can be product led. There's a different aspect to that. And there's be facets around that in terms of how we support customers. How do we, once you said, bring in and make the sales process streamlined for them? What's some of the things you take away from? Yes, we can be product led and product focused, but we still need to have other facets of the business taken care of so we can actually convert and support customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is listening really carefully to what customers actually want, and so you can do all the strategy and strategic thinking around, well, what are the competitors doing, and what do their products look like, and what are the product features, and so forth. But getting time with the customers and understanding, how are they using those products, what do they like, what don't they like, what are the frustrations, what would they like to see in the product, if they could have a dream sort of list of features, what would they be, and why do they need them? Just lots of discussions along those lines so that the innovation sort of happens naturally, and the product develops quite naturally, but it's very much in line with what the market wants. And sometimes the market has a very clear picture of what it wants, and other times the sort of the customers are less clear. So again, it depends a little bit on the area you're in and the strength of the customer relationships, and their understanding of the product in detail. But we, again, no secret to listening very carefully to customers, and now the sales team, document all of the feedback from customers, however big or small, and it all feeds back into the product thinking and product roadmap and so forth.
And you talked about roadmap. How do you manage a roadmap when you're 12 years in and stay on a path to helping customers? And you mentioned that a little bit. Feedback's important and pivotal to us in sales conversations, probably in support conversations. But in terms of managing a roadmap, when we look at technology, how fast it's moving, what are some of the things you need to consider in a business that's scaling quickly like yours is? What are some things that really hold you on steadfast? Okay, this is the direction we're going in, and how do we get there? Because there's a couple of things that I'll talk about later that I want to dig into, and you set up different brands and businesses and why. But roadmap, how do you keep on a path that's really going to get you to where you want to go to, but also listen to the customers at the same time? It's a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not a succinct answer, but I think it's a function of what's the vision, mission, purpose? Like, what are you trying to solve for ultimately? And being very clear around the mission. And then spending a lot of time thinking about the strategic pathways to get there. So you could focus on a single product and keep developing that and keep adding features, and that might get you there. Or you could actually, get it to a certain point and then think about a complementary product or an adjacent product, or something entirely different. So there's lots of strategic choices that you get to make along the journey. Luckily now we've got lots of great product people that have got far more expertise than Ben or I do in the product area, who can help guide those conversations. But it's really understanding the market feedback and the market need, thinking about the broader strategic vision. And then we also spend a lot of time thinking about, given AI is moving so quickly, there's a lot of software that's at risk from AI over the next 5 years. And so some products feel more future-proof from AI than others. And there's some that will...
What are you seeing in the space? Because it is shifting that quickly. So what does that sort of mean to even your business in terms of what's happening in the world of AI?
Yeah, I mean, one example might be, there's certain products that rely on data coming from companies and coming from specific tech platforms that the companies use.
Yep.
And so attached to that data, there's all sorts of privacy and contractual and the issue of confidential information and so forth, like lots of tricky areas to navigate. And so something like that is actually, I would argue, more future-proofed from AI than software where you don't necessarily have those issues, and where it's much easier for the AI systems to replicate the code and the technology. So it's not a great example, but just being very thoughtful around how the technology is developing and how the world's moving, and making sure that you've got that lens on the product roadmap alongside the other things that you're thinking about, is obviously really critical.
Just creating stickiness, but also creating a bit of a moat around data could be quite interesting in this world that we're walking into, is what you say.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
Okay. In terms of some of the learning that you've had across the journey, because I'm sure not everything's gone well across the journey. Um, in times when I speak to people, they've built product, thrown it in the bin, they've tried things that haven't worked. What's some of the biggest takeaways and challenges that you've faced across this 12-year stinking journey that you've been on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is on the people side. Behind every great company is a great team of people, and so I think when you talk about what's got us to where we are, like what's got us to the position we're in today, a lot of it's the team and the people, and building great teams, and focusing on finding people that are values aligned, that are sort of excited about the mission, and who together have very complementary skill sets. So we've spent a lot of time playing to people's strengths and not trying to create a really balanced and well-rounded team. And then if you play to people's strengths and you build the support around them, good things tend to happen, particularly if you've got that cultural and sort of values alignment. So a lot of what we're focused on, as we're scaling now, is the people side, and making sure that we can scale the culture as the team's growing quickly, and making sure that we're challenging the key team members, and there's lots of learning and development opportunities for the whole team, to keep everyone excited, refreshed, and ready for the next chapter.
You mentioned a little bit about culture within an organisation, within a company. When you're sitting at that office in Carlton with the one townhouse and 12 people, it's a lot easier to manage culture and people. How have you found that? I think you mentioned you're about 65, 70 people in the business. How do you drive that across and continue to build culture as you go through it in terms of growing and scaling? Because it's a challenge that people will get to if they're scaling a business.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been interesting, and obviously my role's evolved as the team's got bigger and the business has got more complex.
It always changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels like
Yeah.
each year it's different to the previous year. And I guess the company often evolves faster than the team. Certainly, there's been occasions where I've been playing catch up, and so 2 years ago you might say, oh, if you thought about, well, where's the strongest part of the business? 12 months later, it might be a different part of the business. It's just like the evolution and the speed has been sort of interesting to manage, and there's sort of different points where you need very different skill sets, different experience, people that have gone through what we're going through. And so there's been occasions where we look at, it might be the sales team, the marketing team, the product team, and we think about, well, actually there's no one on the team who's done X, Y, Z. We really need people with experience, because it's like a wonderful shortcut, and it saves, like, smart people can usually work things out, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And it's a pretty slow road in a lot of cases. Whereas if you hire the people who've got the experience, and done what we're trying to do previously, that makes a huge difference. So again, being very thoughtful around, with new appointments and new hires, people that have experience who can help with the challenges that we're not just dealing with today, but the ones that we know are coming. That's been a really big focus for the last 12 months.
You've spoken about people a lot in terms of hiring the right people, bringing experience into the team. When did you learn that in the business? Was there a point where you learned that you need to bring new people on? Or was it something you brought from your corporate career? Where did that come stem from?
So I think it's a function of one of the benefits of working for yourself and starting a business is you get to choose your own team. And you
It
want
is
to
a
choose it.
bonus, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
huge bonus. And you get to choose who you associate with during business hours and often outside of business hours. And so for Ben and me, that was a big attraction of starting a business together. We got to handpick a team that we wanted to work with, that shared similar values, that would challenge us in different ways, and that could really help us build something special. And so I think that's a privilege that we have and that we lean into. And it's exciting each role that we advertise for. Increasingly, we've been trying to headhunt people that we think would be perfect for the role, often who are very happy in the roles they're currently doing. But that sort of ongoing focus on finding the best people and then convincing them why they should come and work with us, that's occupying a lot more of our time today than it used to. But I think it's always been a big part of what we've done.
It sounds like a huge part of what you've done. I'll take it back again to the beginning when you were working at Lazard 7 days a week. Um, you mentioned that you went into business because you wanted to control your own time. I'd love to dig in and see how that went for you because a lot of people go into business and thinking they're going to get some more free time, but reality is it becomes even more time spent into nurturing and growing and evolving. What does that look like at the beginning and to now comparatively in terms of what it's been like in terms of growing a business?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So when I was like life and investment banking, when you're a salaried employee, you've got the safety of your monthly the
It comes in
monthly
every
pay
month.
run.
Yeah, it does.
Um,
Yeah.
and so if I was working 6.5 days a week, for the half a day I wasn't working, it was actually surprisingly easy to switch off and just sort of focus on other things. I think the challenge when it's your own business is you never switch off. And no matter what you're doing or what you're trying to do, you're always thinking about something and something to do with the business. But
Let's,
having said that, if you love what you do and you've got the passion for what you do, it actually just doesn't feel like work. So even now, 12 years in, if on a weekend, I might go from like kids sport to some work task for a few hours and then to a social function or something. That feels like a very natural progression, and it kind of blends in when you like what you're doing and you enjoy working with the people you work with. It just doesn't feel like work. I think if you ask my wife, she would say that I was probably more relaxed when I was in investment banking than I am now, and
fascinating.
that I never switch off and I'm always thinking about work. And I guess there's an element of strain that puts on families and partners, and particularly when you've got young families and you've got kids that young kids that aren't necessarily.
How old are your kids?
So now they're 9 and 5,
Okay,
two
good.
boys.
Nice.
But if you
We've
rewind
got
12 years
similar
ago,
age brackets. Yeah, 12 years
yeah,
and 8
there,
kids. It's a bit
there were
easier,
some pretty
right?
pretty tough years with babies not sleeping,
Yeah.
and you got all the stresses on the work front, and then lots of issues on the home front. And again, we're very lucky to have two healthy boys, but the lack of sleep really gets to you, particularly when you're making important decisions and it's sort of hard to get the time and space when you're doing 10 different jobs in the business, and you're short of sleep and everyone's pulling you in different directions. It's a pretty relentless and pretty intense period, and I think it's common amongst most founders in the first 5 years. The demands are pretty extraordinary, and I think, yeah, not the benefit of working with a brother and an older brother that's very smart and very measured. It's really helpful in those times of peak stress when you've got someone to talk to and someone who can help you and someone who can take some of the load off at different times. So again, I feel very lucky to have a co-founder. If I was trying to do it on my own, I'm not sure I ever would have got um, ever would have got it off the ground, and certainly those difficult times would have been incredibly challenging.
I feel like having a really solid co-founder that's completely opposite to your skill set is a massive advantage. When you're in the same bracket and you're both technical or both business orientated, it becomes a limiting factor. When you complete polar opposites, it sounds like you are. One's really technical, driven, more product focused engineering, and you're coming from a business financial background. Complete polar opposites in reality. And there's a huge advantage to that in terms of yes, you think completely differently and come from different perspectives, but you can have a really candid conversation around where business is going, and one will come from that engineering lens, which is generally very systematic in an approach. So it's a fascinating one. I've got a business partner that's very similar. He's very technical, whereas I come from the business sales lens. It's a bit different in terms of, and it's good to have someone that's different as well. You're not the same. You think differently. And you have probably a bit of back and forth as to how you might approach things in business too.
I think the irony is Ben can do pretty much everything I can do, but I can't do anything that he can do. So I think I definitely get more support from him than he gets from me, but that works really well from my perspective. Yeah.
That works for you. No, brilliant.
Yeah.
When you started the business, did you bootstrap the thing? How did you go about that approach? Did you get investors on at that time? I know you've raised a lot of capital over the past 18 months. Is that because of AI and the whole blow up of the whole AI revolution, or is it just the right timing for the business?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we started, I was sitting in Ben's apartment waiting for the product to be built so we had something to sell. And there was a conversation we had at one point where Ben said, hey, it may not be this year and it may not be next year. So you need to go out and generate revenue somehow while you're waiting for the product.
And challenge you got.
I remember walking around the block thinking about, that wasn't quite what I thought I was signing up for, but I sort of turned back to my investment banking background, and we started a separate business focused on helping founders raise capital and sort of growth capital in particular. And so it was exactly what we would need to do for ourselves at some future date. And so quite quickly that team developed and that business started generating free cash flow that we started using to fund the document AI products that we were building.
Brilliant. That's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, so it's an unusual model, but we basically, it allowed us to self-fund for the first 10 years.
Huge win from that perspective.
Yeah, and so you could think about it as the Visvaram business, which is the capital markets advisory business. It's a funding vehicle, but it's a great business in and of itself, and providing a great service to founders, often who want to bypass the venture capital pathway. Okay. So yeah, we self-funded for the first 10 years, and then basically Affinda, which is the document processing business, and Draftable, which is the document comparison business. Both of them were growing revenue growth at 100% plus, and just had enormous market opportunities. And we just couldn't do that justice and continue to self-fund. And so the decision to raise capital was fairly obvious. It was the month before ChatGPT launched, so September 22, roughly 2 years ago. Yeah. And we'd seen over the Visvaram journey, we'd helped it was like 100 plus companies raise capital, both public and private companies, and we'd seen pretty much every variation of investor that you could raise money from.
It would have helped with the capital raising, I would imagine.
Yeah, you'd hope a little bit. And we had, I think it was 5,000 plus investors in an internal CRM that we'd interacted with over those 10 years. So our model was basically raise money from really fundamental, like the people who could help us do what we were trying to do and get there as quickly as possible. And so, the team have ended up investing quite a lot. People close to the business had been recommending clients and referring customers and telling new customers about us. We brought onto the cap table, and then over time the network has expanded, and we've now got close to 50 family office and high net worth investors who've all invested relatively small amounts as a proportion of their net worth, but sort of in aggregate, it's now close to $25 million in the last 2 years.
It's a lot of capital coming into the business in a short
Yeah,
amount of time. Yeah.
they're really co-investing alongside Ben and me as founders and the team.
Yep.
So we've deliberately kept it as simple as possible. So we've raised ordinary shares.
Okay.
We don't like external debt. We've just like a very clean and simple capital structure. Given so many private companies have issues where they try to grow too quickly, and or they fund themselves with preference shares and convertible notes and different types of debt that needs repayment with nasty maturity dates and so forth. And a lot of that gets in the way of just building a great company and adds massive risk to the business. So yeah, it's a very simple and vanilla approach, but in many ways, the experience we've got supports taking that approach.
Makes sense. If anyone can bootstrap and build their own business and own it for 10 years, you've done a hell of a big effort to invest in R&D and go all that way through, and the innovation and new product streams, multiple industries. It's fascinating to see you at that point and actually get there, because it's not an easy feat. And a lot of people just go after capital first. That's their first thing. Let's go find some money. But I think if you can find revenue in your better place, you're always in a better place, even if it's a different side business, which is fascinating. Generally, what I've heard in yeah,
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the feedback we get from investors is like, why don't you raise more? Why don't you go even faster? And
okay,
it's like there's sort of there's a natural cadence that businesses can grow at.
agree with that.
And if you try to go too fast and you don't have the right sort of senior leaders in place, or you don't have the right sort of foundations, that gets more and more dangerous.
You end up burning capital because you don't have the right people to execute.
Yeah,
You might just spend money in the wrong places. You might get a consulting team in some country that you think you might grow in because you've got the capital to spend. It's
yeah,
it's a bit of a tight line in terms of how do you balance it. It sounds like you're very risk adverse in terms of the way you approach things, but also
yeah.
in business you need to be taking risks to obviously grow it at the same time.
I mean, I think when the founders have got 99% plus of their net worth tied up in the business,
Yeah,
we're probably slightly more conservative than
yeah,
some of our
yeah.
investors.
Yes.
But I think that's a good positive feature as well. Yeah.
What gets you up in the morning? Well, okay, obviously 99% of your net worth's in the business, and I understand that in a similar space myself. What gets you up in the morning to keep going and evolving? And okay, now we're going to take on capital. Now we're going to blow this business up and look to expand it. What's the next evolution? What's that vision that you're striving for as a business at Affinda?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously got lots of internal targets that we're working towards, and 5-year ambitions and goals and so forth. But I think the driving factor is, I guess, one, the relationship with Ben and wanting to be the best partner and founder that I can be, and best support for what we're collectively trying to achieve. I think the second is for the team. We've hired a lot of great people, and they've made decisions from a career perspective to invest the best years of their corporate careers with us. And I think we take that responsibility very seriously. And so we think about, for all the team members who've made the decision to join, we want them to look back on that decision as the best decision they ever made. And I think that's quite it's quite a high bar to
It's a
live up
very
to.
high standard to live up to. Yes, it is.
Yeah, and then increasingly, it's in addition to those two things, a lot of the investors who have come on board and they've known Ben and me for a long time, and there's a lot of trust and confidence that they've placed in us as founders and in our team to execute on the things that we've told them we're intending to execute on. So I think the combination of all those things it provides enormous motivation, and far more
Keeps you
motivation
moving,
now
doesn't it?
than I might have had 5 years ago. So
It's interesting. The more responsibility you take on, the more motivation we can sometimes get access to. I remember when I had my first child, I sort of started the business before I had kids, similar to you.
yeah,
And then when you have your first little one, it's like, okay, there's a bit more responsibility now. It's a bit more serious.
yeah.
So it's more responsibility we take on, the more focused we need to be, or we become, I find. So it's a bit of a fascinating shift in the mindset in terms of how it all comes together.
It's also, yeah, with quarterly group updates and quarterly shareholder updates, and you've got to look everyone in the eyes and tell them what what actually happened and how did you go and what are you planning. I mean, again, we take that very seriously. So, um,
In terms of, you've got a couple of brands. One of the questions I want to ask you about draftable, new different product stream. Why? What was the strategy around approaching it from a different brand positioning, and what does that mean from a selling proposition? How you put it in market? How did that impact the way you're thinking, and what? Why did you go down that path, and not just put it under one umbrella?
yeah, so if you think about, so we've basically got a holding company that owns 100% of each of the three businesses.
Yep.
And so investors are coming in at the holding company level and getting exposure to all three, which is a pretty
Got
normal
it.
construct. I mean, I think the reality is they're each different businesses with different target audiences and
Okay.
different sales and marketing strategies and so forth. So,
Mm.
I mean, Affinda, which is the document processing business, the focus there is like we're spending a lot of time on financial services use cases. So it might be insurance claims processing and automation. It might be loan settlement automation, usually where there's a document intensive process. And we want to embed Affinda's technology so that the people in those businesses can shift from low value work to higher value work, and we can help unlock the creative potential and insights and so forth, and drive sort of broader productivity and efficiency gains for the business. Like that's a very specific focus. For
It
Draftable,
is.
which is document comparison, the target market is law firms and legal teams globally, and so you sort of need a separate brand in order to target that audience and land the key messages and so on and so forth. So it's that business is very legally focused. And then the Visparium business is focused around founders running sort of tech or tech-enabled companies at the growth stage. So
Okay.
it's very, very
It's
specialized, very,
very
very
specialised.
niche,
Yeah.
basically helping companies raise capital that look like us. And as I said, most of those companies have bypassed venture capital pathways. So each of them has a very specific, or framed differently. So Draftable and Visparium have very specific audiences,
Yes.
and you really need a separate brand to target those audiences. Affinda's technology is relevant to every company on the planet because they all have document opportunities, document automation, so on and so forth. So naturally, that's the brand at the group level
Okay.
where the profile and awareness is the most helpful. So yeah, fair bit of thought's gone into it, but that's the whole.
There's a lot of thought and structure when you really rip apart businesses and offerings and how do you position them, and you might learn over time that that's not going to work. It's just really dependent on how it all comes together. So never be set in stone on what a brand is or what it looks like because it can evolve quite quickly as you share the into the different businesses and different structures. But you could easily put it under one umbrella, but the message can get lost from a
Yeah.
marketing perspective. It's a bit difficult. Tim,
I think
um,
yeah, I think the other thing is when we were talking to investors about raising external capital,
yep,
the feedback came through loud and clear that investors wanted exposure to everything we were doing,
it's
um,
interesting. I
and they
find that
kind of wanted
fascinating.
it all in the same
Yeah,
vehicle,
yeah,
even
okay,
though to the outside world that looks
yes.
it's an unusual mix. Um, but yeah, that sort
So they're
of
backing the founders really to
yeah, and I
execute
think in
across.
many ways it's much cleaner having it all together because there's some great synergies between Affinda and Draftable on the document technology
That,
side.
yeah, that makes sense. Correct.
There's some great synergies between Visparium and Affinda in terms of an investment banking salesforce for an AI document processing business.
Okay, get
So
clear.
the bankers in the Visparium team are often finding opportunities for Affinda and have the commercial. We've sort of got a fair bit of commercial firepower that can help identify the best use cases and what's the business case, what's the investment case, what's the return on investment. So there's more synergies within the businesses than probably appear from the outside. And yeah, again, when they're all growing at rapid rates and you ladder up to the group, it's a pretty good story.
It's a good win for everyone. Well, Tim, thank you for coming on and sharing your story today. It's a fascinating one, and bootstrap for 10 years, raising capital, growing and evolving. Like you said, business is changing every day. You have to evolve and learn and grow as an individual in the business every day. It's great to see. Melbourne born and bred, a couple of brothers, started out of a apartment next to Melbourne Uni and where you are today. So congrats on the effort today. But I know you're still moving forward and you've got a long journey ahead. So good luck with it all. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Yeah, likewise, and really appreciate you, hosting the discussion as well. So, big thank you.
No, thank you, Tim. Have a lovely afternoon, and we'll speak soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Andrew.